Well, I'm born in the house I'm living in right now, although I haven't always been there. It's a farm home. My dad was born there. Grew up on the farm and graduated Dwight Rural High School in 1936, 35 actually, and we went on to K-State and graduated there 4 years later. And in the meantime, uh, my training was in agriculture, agronomy, crops and soils. And when I graduated, I began looking for jobs. And in a few months later, I got a job with the Soil Conservation Service, USDA, Soil and Water Conservation. And that was in South Dakota. And that's where I was when I got called on December 7, 1941.
So you were drafted?
See, I was being drafted, and I got a note, a card, or a letter telling me to report to Fort Leavenworth on December 7th. So I quit my job, said goodbye to my buddies, and came home. My home is where I am living today, 2.5 miles out of Dwight. My folks were living there. I came home and had Thanksgiving with them. And then on the day that I had to go, they took me down to Topeka. I got on a bus there and was on the bus on the way to Fort Leavenworth when somebody came on the bus at one of the stops in between and told us that Pearl Harbor had been hit by the Japanese. So that's when I knew that I was going to be in the Army for quite a while.
How long were you in the service?
Well, I think it figures out about 6 years altogether. Well, I guess I didn't feel like I had fear or anything of that nature, but it was kind of remarkable. I thought that I was being brought into the Army on that very day that the war really began. So from that standpoint, it was kind of interesting. We still did take casualties, and we also began to take people that had been in prison and then gotten released from prison. So we had a lot of them, and occasionally we would have a civilian citizen be there for some reason. And in other words, the hospital was, pretty free with who they treated, and they were willing to take them in whenever they could. So, and like I had mentioned before, as time went on, the war was over, but we're still there. And of course, we did operate for a while, even after the war was over, because of these people that seem to appear, some that have been freed and that kind of thing. But in the meantime, we began to have opportunities to look around a little bit, have free time, do things that we kind of wanted to do. And I know some people were able to go to Paris, and I think some even had an opportunity to go to London. But it was interesting to be able to go down into the mountains where Hitler had his hideout, managed to get down there and get to see that place, which was a beautiful place.
Where was that?
Down in the Alps mountains. It was fun, and we saw a lot of nice scenery and that sort of thing.
So where were you when you heard that the war ended?
At a place called Gera, Gera, which was very close to where our units joined the Russians. And we had gotten up there and really barely got started doing any operations when we got orders to come back out. And so we came back quite a ways where we finally set up the hospital where it remained. then until the war was, well, everything after the war was kind of wound down, and we quit being able to take casualties. And that's when people had an opportunity to kind of do things, play games, baseball, and little stuff like that. And then also to make these kind of trips that we organized. Well, I was in Germany until, I don't know the exact date, but the last part of November, I believe it was. And then
Of
we
what
went
year?
Of 45.
Okay.
Yeah, so the war ended in 45, and so we drove down all the way to the coast, and we came to the coast, and there were ships there. There was a Liberty ship that somebody made arrangements for us to get on, and that's how we came back home on a Liberty ship. And that took, I don't remember how many days, somewhere around 12 days, and everything worked out well, except that around Bermuda, we ran into a storm that required that we drop anchor to the extent you could, and just tried to wait out the storm. There was no alternative to that. And you can imagine I was sick about 36 hours from that effect. But eventually the storm went over, and we were able to lift anchor and go on. And then we went on from there into New York. So we were discharged in New York City. Well, pretty neat. It was really neat to see the the Liberty
Statue of Liberty.
Statue of Liberty, and that was really well, a rather emotional time. But it was nice to be able to just sail right by it and be able to see it and see that we're going by and we're on our way home. So we get home and get to New York, and at that point, when I had opportunity, I called home and told my wife where I was. And by that time, I knew I was going to go to a place in Little Rock, and that I would be there. I didn't know for sure when, but that's where I was going to go. She came there, and the effect was that I think both of us were there about a day, neither one of us knowing really where we are. You're not familiar with anything. And eventually, I think about a day, we finally got together and arrived together at the same place at the same time. So that was really a great opportunity as well. One thing, the last person I saw was a recruiter, and he talked me into sign up in the reserves for 3 years. Well, in a sense, that was a mistake. I didn't need to do that, but I did. And I'm sure had my wife been with me at that moment, she would have said something, well, do you think you'd want to do that? But that wasn't the way it went. As a result of that, as you know, Korea came along, and I'm in the reserves, so I ended up getting called because of Korea. And initially they sent me to Fort Meade, Maryland, where I worked as I guess I was a platoon leader there with a group that was being in training. So I went through one training session with a group, and then went about halfway through another. And I'd been there now about nine months, and I got orders to go to Korea. So then I folded up there. My family had been with me up to that point. So now we drove home, left the folks at home, and I got on the plane and went on my way to, well, first of all, Japan, and there I did some training and finally found out I was going to the Near East, so it turned out that it was going directly to Korea from there. So I was about 9 months in Korea, so altogether about 18 months in as Korea time.
Wow.
And there I'm still medical administrative, but this time I'm the commander of the ambulance company of the 7th Infantry Division. Now the ambulance company would have about 36 ambulances. So I was responsible for that. And of course ambulances didn't go out where the fighting was, but go close to it. And the collecting company would gradually, and the doughboys, the medics out in the field, have them be brought back to where they could be put on an ambulance and then brought back to a hospital. Now, you know all about MASH, but of course MASH is entirely different than what you might imagine there. But I was not really involved in MASH at all. I never was in one at all. But anyway, our responsibility was to deliver these casualties back to a hospital. Some of our drivers probably brought to MASH, but also to maybe a general hospital farther back and that sort of thing. So everything turned out well, but the experience was entirely different. I recognize the whole experience as something that I'm glad I had under the circumstances, that I was willing to be there, and glad that I was able to be there and to make a contribution, what I felt was a contribution for something that needed to be done. So I think my outlook was positive, and I was glad for that opportunity. And even in Korea, the same way, that this experience was entirely different, but all the same, the objectives were all the same. Well, the main thing, I want people not to forget World War II and be reminded, and I'm thankful for a situation like we have here this week, these few days, for the opportunity to allow the public to have the experience of meeting some of these people who had the opportunity, and help them to reflect on what happened back there at that time, and that it was undoubtedly was worthwhile. It was absolutely necessary. Had we not been in that war, things would have been entirely different. It was, the situation was such that Germany was really prepared to be able to take over England, and had they done that, then the next move would have been right down here in the United States. So I appreciate all of the possibility that I experienced, and the fact that there's an opportunity for people today to have an opportunity to reflect on that and the importance of it.